On the last day of Passover, in the late afternoon, Breslovers hold the Seuda Baal Shem Tov, the meal of the Baal Shem Tov. And the meal can take place at the synagogue or at home. And during the meal, we tell the story of the Baal Shem Tov's Nesiah, his journey and attempt to reach the Holy Land. This is the version as recorded by Rabbi David Sears. The Baal Shem Tov's Nesiah. The Baal Shem Tov experienced great desire to travel to Eretz Yisrael until at last the time came. The Baal Shem Tov took his only daughter, the Tzadekis Odel, and his chassid, Reb Hirsch Sofer, as companions for the journey. It was very unusual to travel to Eretz Yisrael in those days, and extremely difficult, unlike today. But he trusted in Hashem and left his home in Mezhebush with only enough money to reach the next town. It is well known that the Baal Shem Tov did not keep even a small coin overnight, but lived from day to day, trusting completely in Hashem. He was confident that Hashem would make a way for him. Day by day and week by week, the threesome traveled from one town to the next, heading toward the port city of Istanbul on the Black Sea. Somehow, the Baal Shem Tov received enough money to keep traveling until they arrived in Istanbul on Erev Pesach. They had neither provisions nor money for lodgings, but the Baal Shem Tov was sure that everything would work out satisfactorily. They found an inn in the Jewish quarter of the city and took lodgings on the ground floor where the horses were stabled. Udal went to shore to wash clothes for Yom Tov, while her father and Reb Hirsch went to a nearby base medrash. At the same time, a wealthy, childless couple from Germany arrived in Istanbul. This couple had been following the Baal Shem Tov from town to town in order to obtain his bracha, and only caught up to him now. Behashgacha pratis, they wound up at the same inn where they rented a large suite of rooms, and they bought matzahs, wine, and food for Pesach. Then they went in search of the Baal Shem Tov. They found a Jewish girl washing clothes at the seashore, Udal, of course, and they asked her if she knew the whereabouts of the Baal Shem Tov, and learned that the Baal Shem Tov was none other than her father. Overjoyed, they took Udal back to the inn and instructed the servants to bring the possessions of the tzaddik and his daughter and disciple from the stables to their rooms upstairs. Knowing nothing about this, the Baal Shem Tov and Reb Hirsch davened and came back after Mariv, the evening prayers, to find everything prepared for the Seder and for Yom Tov. The Baal Shem Tov displayed no surprise at this, but proceeded to conduct the Seder without indicating that anything unusual had happened. Only after he had completed the Seder did the Baal Shem Tov turn to the host and hostess and declared, "I know why you came here. Know that your wish has been fulfilled, and you will have a child this year." However, no sooner had the words escaped his lips than the Baal Shem Tov's face clouded over, and he closed his eyes. He was experiencing Aliyas HaNeshama, an ascent of the soul to the upper worlds. His daughter Udal had seen this before, but now she was terrified. Her father seemed to be in a state of gesisa mamash. His life literally seemed to be hanging by a thread. In heaven, the evil accuser demanded, "This couple has been fated to remain childless. By what right did the Baal Shem Tov force the Ribono Shel Olam to change all of creation for the sake of this man and woman. The Gemara states that Tzaddik decrees and Hashem fulfills, and the Baal Shem Tov's blessing would surely bear fruit. However, in such matters, there is a price to be paid. The heavenly court ruled that in exchange, the Baal Shem Tov would lose his Olam Haba, his place in the afterlife. Then the Baal Shem Tov suddenly opened his eyes. The color returned to his face, and with great simcha, he joyfully declared, "Now I will be able to serve Hashem without any thought of future reward." At this, the evil accuser insisted that the heavenly court restore his Olam Haba. To let the Baal Shem Tov serve Hashem with such absolute selfishness was too much. At this, the evil accuser insisted that the heavenly court restore his Olam Haba. To let the Baal Shem Tov serve Hashem with such absolute selflessness was too much. Although the Baal Shem Tov's purpose was to go to Eretz Yisrael, his journey, like all of his actions, contained many other mysteries and purposes. Reb Nosson says that this is not only true of the tzaddikim, but even of ordinary Jews. Everything we do reflects Hashem's hidden plan for creation. Let's return to Istanbul. In Istanbul, there was a sultan, and he was a tyrant, and he had a special hatred towards the Jewish people. But the Jews had influence in the city, and the sultan had to resort to underhanded means to hurt them. On that Erev Pesach, he called together his royal ministers for a secret meeting. He proposed that a pogrom be carried out the next morning, in which the mobs would be incited to kill every Jewish man, woman, and child in Istanbul. His ministers were sworn to secrecy about this plan on penalty of death. Yet one of the royal ministers was a righteous Gentile and a friend of the Jews. Risking his life, he hastened to warn the leaders of the Jewish community of their great peril. After discussing the matter, they decided to send emissaries to the Sultana, the widow of the previous sultan, who had treated his Jewish subjects with kindness and respect. Perhaps she could intervene. Under cover of night, the emissaries made their way through the city streets towards the palace of the Sultana. Their long trek took them past the very inn where the Baal Shem Tov and his companions were concluding the Seder. Through an open window, they could hear the Baal Shem Tov singing with great fervor, Le'ose neflaos gedolos levado, to the one who alone performs wondrous miracles. One of the emissaries remarked wryly to his friend, "If that Jew only knew what we know, he wouldn't sing these words so sweetly." Arriving at the palace, the emissaries begged the guards for permission to obtain an audience with the Sultana, but they were refused admission. Yet they persisted until the Sultana heard the racket at the door and asked who wanted to see her at such a late hour. Learning that they were representatives of the Jewish community on an urgent mission, the good-hearted Sultana admitted them and listened to their tale of impending doom. Given the urgency of the situation, she asked the emissaries to remain in her home while she set out in the night to intercede with her son, the Sultan. Arriving at the royal palace, she woke him up and announced, "Tonight your father came to me in a dream, and he revealed to me that tomorrow our family will be utterly wiped out. My heart palpitated with dread. That's why I hurried here. We must consult the royal chronicles to see if we can find a reason for this evil decree." The Sultan sent for the royal record book and in his mother's presence he saw inscribed therein what he himself had commanded, the slaughter of the Jewish community scheduled for the next morning. "Now, my son, I know why I had this terrible dream," the Sultana said. "Don't you know what happens to anyone who harms the Jews? Don't you know what happened to Pharaoh and to Haman and to the rest of the enemies of the Jewish people? You must call off this pogrom, or my dream will surely come true." Once the Sultan had torn up his cruel decree, his mother returned home to inform the Jewish emissaries of her success. Even though it was hours later, when the emissaries passed the same inn on their way home, they were surprised to hear the same man singing Le'osa neflaos gedolos levado. And now they heard him singing with even greater joy. After the morning prayers, the community leaders informed the Kehillah that a great miracle had occurred. Because of Hashem's mercy, the Jews of Istanbul had been saved from certain death. In recounting the highlights of the story, they didn't fail to mention the Jew who sang of Hashem's miracles at the end of the Seder, and how, if he had known what was going on, he wouldn't have been able to sing. At this, the Baal Shem Tov remarked, "It seems to me that by singing Le'osa neflaos gedolos levado, who alone performs wondrous miracles, this Jew nullified the heavenly decree." On the first day of Chol HaMoed, the couple from Germany bade farewell to the Baal Shem Tov. They wished to lavish upon him various gifts in their gratitude for his blessing, but the Baal Shem Tov refused. He didn't want anything except the kindness they had already shown him. Only one thing did he request, that they provide him and his companions with tickets for the next ship to the Holy Land. This they happily did, and the next ship was leaving that day. Before boarding, the Baal Shem Tov told his daughter and Reb Hirsch that he could go to the Holy Land much more quickly. All he had to do was toss his gartel on the waves of the sea, and they could walk across it to their destination. The only condition was that they would have to focus their minds on one of Hashem's holy names without breaking their concentration for even a second. The Tzedekes Udal said she was willing to do so. However, Reb Hirsch feared he wouldn't be able to maintain his concentration, so they traveled by ship. At first, the journey across the sea was peaceful, but in the middle of their voyage, the sky suddenly darkened and a mighty storm struck. The powerful winds cast the ship on turbulent waves until it seemed that they were about to capsize. The Baal Shem Tov said, "The sea will be stilled only if I cast my writings overboard, or if my daughter is willing to take their place. Only then will the storm subside." Udal actually considered jumping into the sea, but suddenly she had a heavenly communication about her grandson, Rebbe Nachman of Breslov, and how he would write even greater teachings than those of her father. So she told her father that he should cast his manuscripts into the sea after all. Immediately he did, and the storm stopped as suddenly as it had begun. After this ordeal, everyone on the ship was drained physically and emotionally. So they headed for the next island and anchored offshore in order to set their feet on dry land again for a little while. The passengers disembarked and began to stroll along the shore among the verdant trees to recover from their distress. The Baal Shem Tov and his companions walked until they found a nice shady spot among the trees to rest. However, they soon discovered that they had company, Out of the forest emerged a group of cannibals brandishing knives and spears. In a few minutes, these cannibals had tied them up and cast them on the ground. Reb Hirsch, quaking in terror, asked the Baal Shem Tov, "Rebbe, please do something and save us from these savages." However, the Baal Shem Tov was silent. "Why don't you answer me?" Reb Hirsch exclaimed. "Because right now I don't know anything," the Baal Shem Tov replied. "Do you know anything?" "Nothing at all," Reb Hirsch said. "Just the Aleph base." The cannibals surrounded them, grinning malevolently. They sharpened their knives. In a moment they would start getting ready for their dinner. The Baal Shem Tov cried out, "If you know the Aleph base, say it." Reb Hirsch began, "Aleph," and the Baal Shem Tov answered, "Aleph." Reb Hirsch said, "Base," and the Baal Shem Tov said, "Base." "Gimel," Gimel, Daled, Daled. As they pronounced the names of the holy letters, the Baal Shem Tov suddenly regained his supernatural powers. In the distance, a bell began ringing. The sound came closer and closer. Alarmed, the cannibals hastily fled. Soon a carriage came into view, and the people inside freed the prisoners. The miraculous carriage transported them back to the shore, where they joined the other passengers returning to the ship. The wind filled their sails, and the ship began to travel rapidly, straight back to Istanbul, in time for Acharon Shel Pesach. Why was the holy Baal Shem Tov unable to reach the Holy Land? Yet his great-grandson, Rebbe Nachman, was able to overcome all obstacles and arrive in Eretz Yisrael. Why did he succeed where others had not? Rebbe Nachman explained, Eretz Yisrael, the Holy Land of Israel, is the concept of godless to godless, a sublime level of expanded consciousness. And it's known that every spiritual ascent must be preceded by a descent. Since Eretz Yisrael is godless to godless, it must be preceded by katnus to katnus, a most extreme descent. Those who came before me were unable to cast themselves down to such depths. And in fact, this is one of Rebbe Nachman's main teachings and a source of great inspiration. Anytime you or I have a descent, a spiritual fall, a difficulty of any kind, and we feel we are about to despair, we must remember what the Rebbe says, that the Yerida is for the sake of the Aliyah. The descent is for the sake of the ascent. In fact, without the descent, there could be no ascent at all.